Hello, my dearest friends, and welcome back to today's episode. Today's episode is all about men's fertility. In the many sessions that we had and also conversations, we often see men struggling in silence with their fertility challenges. And they often don't have space to voice that out, a space where they can have an exchange with others on their fertility struggles, where they can get a different perspective even, or they find someone who can explain what these issues really mean and what the consequences are and what the options could be. And so today's session is dedicated to all the men that are struggling with infertility, but not only the men. To be honest, it's also for the partners, because I feel that this is going to be an amazing opportunity for the partner to listen to what Shaun Greenaway is going to share, because he has been there. He has gone through the whole journey. And with whole, I mean from going to feel excited about starting a family, to doing the tests, to being diagnosed with azoospermia, which means basically not having any sperms in the ejaculate, and then going through different procedures, and then ultimately to decide to take the donor route. So if there is a chance to get a different perspective, then this is the episode you really want to listen to, because it gives you a true and real insight into how it is when you are a man and you are going through a fertility journey and facing all these struggles, but also all these unknown that can put you really into an isolated space. So grab a glass of water or a tea or a cup of coffee, relax and sit back. Let's begin. A warm welcome to Shaun Greenaway here in our podcast today. I'm really, really excited to have you here, Shaun, today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's an absolute honor and privilege.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Before we actually dive into deeper conversations, which I'm really, really very excited to have those with you, I would love to kick off with the first question that I like to ask every guest on my podcast, which is your morning ritual. Is there anything that you love doing in the morning to kick off your day?
Haha, that's something that has very much changed over the last few years. It's kind of very much what I used to do before kids, and now what I do with kids. I'm now in survival mode. I used to have the most elaborate morning routine. Honestly, I used to get up, journal, meditate, have a coffee, have a stretch, or do yoga, and sometimes some affirmations. And that would all last around 30 to 40 minutes, and it was glorious. However, now my mornings are loud, messy, chaotic, but they're the best morning routines I've ever had. It's If I manage to grab a coffee, it's a good morning. But honestly, I wouldn't. So my morning routine is getting up with the kids, having cuddles,
Oh,
and yeah, just cuddling with them whilst they're drinking their morning milk, and it's
yeah.
that is better for my wellness than any other elaborate morning routine I've ever had.
Oh, wonderful to hear that. And cuddles are the best, really. Yes,
Yeah, those
yes.
morning cuddles where they're all beddy and snuggly is yeah, awesome.
Yes, they are. They are. Our kids are now a little bit older, so I wouldn't get necessarily those cuddles anymore. So any cuddle that I can get is very precious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, so for those listeners, we have listeners in Asia, but also in Australia, New Zealand, and we have in Europe and America. So for those who don't know you yet, may I just maybe ask you to introduce yourself and to share with our listeners what led you to do what you do today?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Shaun Greenaway. I'm a male fertility and donor conception advocate. I very much am doing this now after what I experienced in my personal life. So my wife and I, like many people, wanted to start a family, and we realized it wasn't happening. And we had some initial tests, and it was actually established that the issue was all coming on my part.
Mhm.
And that then became a very lonely place to be as a man. I'm talking now, this is kind of going back 8 years ago.
Mm.
And there were no men talking about this. And I navigated this very alone, very silently. And, we'll go into my story in more depth, but that essentially, that experience compelled me, drove me to want to change something. So I started sharing my story to help other men. And there's just it's snowballed really. It started off with me sharing my story on Instagram, a handle called Knackers, and
Mm.
sometimes that's based on two words of British irony, and knackered being broken and knackers being balls. It doesn't always translate into every
Mm.
language, not even to the US actually, because they don't have the slang for those words. But
Mm.
and then that led to a podcast with my co-host, and even now onto our business, Nexus Fertility, which is all about supporting men, giving them connection, and making them feel part of a community. Because there are so many men going through this, but so few men talking about it. So we are passionate to make that change.
Mm. Yeah, which is absolutely amazing. And I think it's such an area that is so undiscovered yet. And this is something that we actually hear about it at these conferences when we attend the reproductive medicine conferences around the world, that it's really like the male fertility is really still an area that is not much being researched. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
hopefully, like the conversation's starting to shift a bit, isn't it? So, and that's not just from a patient perspective; it's from the professionals as well. So, hopefully, over the next kind of 10 years, that will really that pendulum will start to shift back to what should be the
Yes.
middle. Because, yeah, as I'm sure we'll get into, everyone for so many years considered fertility to just be a female issue, but
Yes.
that's complete nonsense. And you know, when you really strip it back,
Mm.
it takes two to tango. There are two sexes. So
Mm.
why do we always why do we attribute this to solely, or not solely, but more so to one of the sexes? It's just complete nonsense, really.
Yes, yes. So maybe we could actually start talking more about like how men can actually more find out about like where they are with their fertility health first, because some men I also feel some men really need the educational piece as well, because sometimes they're just being told by the doctor what to do next, but they have no idea of what to actually really do. So, could you maybe share with us, like, what would be your advice for men that are on this journey? What are the the first steps actually to go into this and
Mm.
find out more?
Yeah, well, you so appropriately touched on the education piece, because actually this does start really earlier. But
Mm.
my sex education when I was growing up was all about how not to get pregnant.
Yeah.
From people I've spoken to in that setting now, of course, that is still a conversation, but it's also around not passing on sexually transmitted infections. But the conversation needs to also be from an earlier age about the fact that it's not a given, it's not easy. Uh,
Mm.
and the World Health Organization recently published their updated report on fertility. The numbers, the statistics are stark. So it does start with that early education. And this isn't all on schools, etc., but it's about society, and that eradicating that presumption that fertility is a given and is easy,
Mm.
and that is social media,
Mm.
the, the the old traditional kind of news outlets as well, because that's what hits harder when you do find yourself in the situation, is because everything perpetuates this myth that, especially as a man, that our fertility isn't really a problem. And then
Mhm.
when you see older celebrities having children, like the Rolling Stones having kids into their 70s and 80s, it doesn't help that notion that, oh, men's sperm health doesn't decline. That's
Mm.
simply not true. Our sperm numbers and health has declined 50% over the last 50 years. And
Mm,
all of the stats for the future show that it's going to take an even bigger decline unless we start to address that. So when it comes to men and
mm,
testing us is a lot simpler and
mm,
cheaper and easier. And as I said, we're half the problem. Again, that the recent World Health Organization report says
mm,
it. That men are up to 50% of fertility issues. So get tested early. There are now, yeah, you should be going to the GP, but if that is one step too far sometimes for men, because there is a wider health issue with men, that we are often reluctant to seek medical intervention, even where there are symptoms. And I'm not talking about just fertility health here, but just general health. Men can be, there's work to be done with men about seeking medical advice and assistance. But we can get at home sperm test kits for that kind of early marker. And
mm,
that would give you a good indication of where you're at and then whether you then need to go. Of course, all of the home kits, for example, they do say this will never replicate a clinical grade test,
mm,
but it's a good indication. It's something you can do in the privacy of your own home. And that reduces that initial stigma of doing it, because it is a big step. And
mm,
especially if a couple has been trying to conceive for, up to a year, uh, then the pressure starts mounting and
mm.
the worry kicks in. And it can just be that one little step to help reduce that and just give you an idea of where you're at from the outset, from the man's perspective.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. And it's so great that you mentioned about those home kits because they are so much easier. Although I must say that a lot of IVF clinics make it easier as well nowadays to actually give that kit home, that you can bring it home and actually bring the sample then back to the clinic. The only thing that they ask is to do it within 1 hour or so, so that the laboratory can actually process the semen analysis as fresh as they can. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Uh,
never had that option myself because of where I lived, but I
mm,
understand that it, typically, yes, within an hour, isn't it? And you have to try and keep it to as close to body temperature as you can. I've heard stories of people storing it
yeah.
under their armpits or the female partner in their bra and stuff like that. But I never had that experience myself. But I think generally they would the kind of grade A example would be in the clinic, so they can get it straight into the embryology lab afterwards. But yeah,
Mm,
sometimes it can be a stepped process for men, because I could tell you from first-hand experience many times over, it's
mhm.
not a nice experience going into a clinic to produce a sample.
Yes.
There's been some flippant remarks and taglines given for that in the past for men. Oh, the easy bit. I can
Mm,
tell you, it's anything but easy. There,
yeah.
there can be so much pressure riding on it. There is so much pressure riding on it. I had an occasion where I couldn't do it
Mm,
because I'd got completely into my own head,
mm,
and that's not a good place to be when you're trying to do something physical. And I couldn't
yeah.
do it. And then having to relay that news to my wife was really hard to do.
Mm, mm. Absolutely. Yes. And then you also have this incredible vulnerability and exposure in a clinic where you have to go back to the reception area or to the counter to let anybody know, right? So it can sometimes be really like a place where it's really, really difficult. On top of that, it's already difficult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
exactly that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
had that. I've had varying clinics, some which have like a hatch where you put it in. But
Mm.
it just happens that that one didn't have a hatch. I had to take it back to the reception to
Oh.
a person in their office,
Mm.
and she was like, "Oh, it's empty," and I
Mm.
was like, "Yeah, I know," and just basically ran ran away. But it wasn't. Yeah, it was an awful situation.
Absolutely awful. Absolutely awful. And I think for those that are listening, if you work in a clinic, please become aware of these situations because this shouldn't happen at an IVF clinic or at any clinic, actually. It's
Yes.
all about safety and protection of patients, of really making them feel safe and protected when
Yeah.
they come and are at the clinic. Yeah. And sometimes also I get the feedback that they feel like being a numbers, patients feel like being a numbers of a clinic because there are so many in the waiting room, and exposure again is incredible when
Well,
you are in
that again, coming back to that one scenario. So
Mm-hmm.
I had a window where I had to go in. It was a in the UK we have our national health system, and it was not a private clinic; it was a public hospital.
Yeah.
And I went in the minute it opened. I wanted to get in and out
Mm-hmm.
before the crowds came. So I got there, and I was the only one. I went into the room. I was in there for 45 minutes. I
Mm-hmm.
obviously trying, so
Mm-hmm.
desperately trying, but the pressure was just getting to me. And by the
Mm.
time I left, the waiting room was full, and I had to hand over that empty cup. And
Wow.
the clinician or receptionist who I gave it to obviously announced to everyone, "Oh, but it's empty." And
Oh,
the waiting room, there must have been 20 people in there. And
oh,
so I just wanted the ground to swallow me up. And yeah,
yeah.
oh, horrible experience.
Yes. So how did you overcome actually all of this, Shaun? I'm wondering because there was like one layer after the next, right? So how
Yeah.
did you actually find yourself back into a position where you felt like more encouraged, more grounded, stronger? How did you bring that together? What helped you?
Well, I think if I use that example, because what I
Mm-hmm.
did on that day, I think is probably a good signifier for the whole journey. So to bring some context to that sample was probably trying to think where it was, and then I can timeline it. I think that was probably about a year and a half to 2 years into our journey after
Okay.
being diagnosed, and you know, which is already is a year after us trying. And then
Mm-hmm.
I got diagnosed with azoospermia in 2018, January 2018.
Okay.
And that clinic, so I can date it. That was around March 2019 when this happened. No, June. I remember it was after I had a varicocele embolization
Oh, wow.
in March 19. So that was 3 months on, where they were trying to wait for the sperm cycle to regenerate to see if
Mm-hmm.
the varicocele embolization had taken any effect. But there was
Mm-hmm.
so much riding on that result
Mm-hmm.
because it was, you know, potentially that operation could have helped me a lot. Go from zero sperm to something that they could work with.
Yes.
And that's why the pressure was particularly high. I think that was probably by that point my fourth or fifth trip
Okay.
to a clinic to provide a sample.
Yes.
But it was the first time where I couldn't because of that pressure. This whole time, up to then, I hadn't spoken to anyone. I was suffering on my own. But if I take it back to what
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned, how I dealt with that. So in that scenario, pressure, that
Mm-hmm.
pressure, stigma, shame of not being able to produce, but that translates to the whole journey that I was going
Mm-hmm.
through. And then I pretty much, like I said, I wanted the ground to swallow me up. I pretty much ran out of that room. But
Mm-hmm.
then I had to compose myself.
Yeah.
I had to phone my wife to pass on the news.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she thankfully was quite understanding. You know, I said that the pressure was getting to me. There was so much riding on that. And then I had to call the clinic back and explain because I'd also given them the form that I needed to,
Mm-hmm.
for the appointment. And thankfully they hadn't thrown it away. And so we were able to all kind of calm down a bit, rationalize. And then I was able to go back in, I think a day or so later and give the sample from a more rational standpoint. But I think that has a wider kind of meaning and context as to how I ended up navigating the whole journey because there is so much pressure, stigma, that shame, the grief as well. And it's
Mm-hmm.
all a process. And that's like a small 1 day example of what had to happen over years for me was
Mm-hmm.
kind of taking stock, rationalizing, figuring out who I was, where I was, and then coming out the other side, which I'm sure we will expand further on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would definitely love to talk about that grief, but maybe just for an educational purpose, because I had men in my sessions who actually didn't realize that they can have an ejaculate, but there is no sperms in the ejaculate. And is this what happened to you, Shaun?
Yes. Yeah, I think
So,
that's sorry
mhm.
to but like because people assume when I say I've got no sperm, they think that like
Yeah.
a puff of air must come out or something. But there's a difference
Mhm.
between sperm and semen. Semen is the seminal fluid that
Yeah.
carries the sperm. I have
Yeah.
that, but within that there is no sperm.
Exactly, exactly. Because I got so many actually clients who actually assumed that because they can ejaculate, there must be no problem with them. And I think with that, it starts already in the educational purpose, right? That uh, men actually think a lot of men don't know that they may or may not have sperms in their ejaculate at the end. And so they are really shocked when they get the news from the sperm sample that actually they have no sperms
Mm,
to fertilize the egg. Yeah.
yes,
So, and that was the case with you, is that correct?
absolutely. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I had no
Mm.
evidence to point to the fact that I was infertile. That
Yeah.
I had a, a, I could ejaculate.
Yeah.
I was a healthy young
Mm.
man. Uh,
Yeah.
not optimum, but certainly, I was not heavily overweight or anything. I didn't smoke. I've never smoked, so I had no evidence to assume that I would
Mm.
have no sperm, or even a suboptimal count. I just, like many men, you just take it for granted that it's there as and
Yeah.
when you need it. And I was just living my life, and until we wanted to start that family, and nothing was happening, and yeah, it was that's why I think that it's almost like dropping off a cliff for men, because you have with women, it's that kind of the early stage education of like the biological time, that like the
Mm.
clock and egg count, that you're born with it, and it
Mm.
just declines, declines, declines. With men, there's nothing like that. But even
Mm.
though, like I touched upon earlier, it does decline. Like all the science is pointing that way, but the
Yeah.
societal assumption is that it's never at risk, and we just can plod along happily
Hmm.
doing what we want until it's time to pull the trigger, so to speak, and until you can't.
Yeah. So how long did it take for you actually to find out from the moment that you started trying to form a family until you actually got the diagnosis on your sperm sample?
So a year pretty much. So we started trying at the outset of 2017.
Yeah.
My wife was on the contraceptive pill, and through more word of mouth, we kind of believed that it may take a couple of months to work its way out of her system, especially after being on it for so many years. So we kind of gave ourselves a couple of months grace to just not too much pressure, and, enjoy it as all the people tell you to do. And then other people bemoan the fact that it happens first time for them, and they
Mm.
think that that's a burden. Yeah, well, let me tell you about the other
Yeah.
side of it. And yeah, but then those kind of first couple of months came and went. Then we came into the summer, not happening, not happening. We ended up, we went on holiday in
Mm.
September of 2017 to Croatia, because everyone tells you just to relax, right? Just go on holiday.
Mm.
Just yeah, you just need to relax and it will happen. And we bought into that, because I think you
Mm.
do cling on to hope, and these small morsels of, at this point we didn't know how acutely that hope would be a lifeline for us. At this time, it was just the general hope of conceiving. And
Mm.
we went on that holiday, and we were convinced it was going to happen, to the point where we were thinking, oh, we should, uh, if we have a child after this holiday, we should probably give it a Croatian related name, a bit like
Mm.
the Beckhams obviously had Brooklyn. And we were like, yeah, we should, it would have to be a Croatian theme or a water based theme, because we were doing a lot of sailing and stuff.
Mm.
But then the first, when my wife had her period after following that holiday,
Mm.
that was when we were like, okay, that felt quite crushing.
Mm.
And so it was towards the end of the year that we went to the doctors, and we were both referred for tests, and it was January 2018. I received my diagnosis over the phone.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. And how did that work?
not great. So
Yeah.
I was at work, because
Oh.
I was probably in my early to mid 30s at this point.
Mm-hmm.
where were we, 2018. So yeah, I would have been just turning 35 myself. My wife is a couple of years younger. So like many people trying to conceive, certainly in the West or in the UK where I am, typically we're in our 30s. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
the median age. And like so much of our waking hours, unfortunately, I spent at work. I say unfortunately, if you don't enjoy it, which I didn't at the time. And so it typically people do have to navigate all of this whilst at work as well, and the appointments, the phone calls, everything, which is an additional huge burden as well of stress. But I was at work, got a phone call, took it outside, and it was someone at my doctor's surgery. And when I say someone, I'm I'm pretty certain it wouldn't have been a doctor. I'm pretty convinced also that it wouldn't have been a nurse, someone with medical training. I
Mm-hmm.
believe it was probably a member of the admin staff or a receptionist because they phoned up to say, right, we've got the results of your semen sample. You need to book another appointment in for 3 months. Now, at this point, I have no idea why,
Mm-hmm.
now I know that, as I said earlier, that the sperm cycle is around 3 months, from 74 to 90 days for sperm to regenerate. And there are many things that can impact one particular sample on one particular day. Illnesses, for example, medications. So typically they want a second test to verify the first one. I didn't know any of this at the time. I was just on the phone. Said, okay, fine. Why do I need to do that? And
Mm-hmm.
then she stumbled over the word azoospermia. She clearly hadn't proofread the letter that she had in front of her or on her screen first. She was just going through it, responding to my questions. And she said, well, it says here that you've got azoospermia. And she ended that word with that intonation, like it was a question to me.
Mm-hmm.
Azoospermia? So I said, well, what's that? And she said, I don't know. So I
Oh.
said, yeah, I was like, okay, fine. So I booked the second test in for March, which was obviously 3 months later. Got off
Mm-hmm.
the phone to her, went onto Google to find out that that meant I had no sperm, like zero. And I'm like, hang on, men have millions, tens of millions of these things. How have I got none? Um, so yeah, a life changing word, a word that I had never heard before then, and a
Mm-hmm.
word that has come to define my life since that moment. Sat on a concrete step outside of my office, and I then had to phone my wife to relay that news to her as well. So yeah, very much a life changing moment. And as you can probably guess from what I've said, that the second test confirmed it. There was nothing there.
Mm-hmm. 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 I can't believe how this message was conveyed. And
Mm,
and this was in 2018, right?
yeah,
And I really, really hope that IVF clinics are changing the way how they are communicating. But yeah, you're
they're not. No,
yeah,
they're
no,
not.
you're shaking your head.
I'm still speaking to guys. I mean, it's
Yeah,
more. And you mentioned IVF clinics. This is that step before. This is your
yeah,
normal doctors. But
yes,
unfortunately, there are still issues with clinics as well. People who have training and this is their job. But I
yeah.
speak to guys right now, so 7 or 8 years on from that moment, who unfortunately are receiving misdiagnosis
Oh,
from their GPs sometimes. I've spoken to two guys recently who were told they had suboptimal low results, but they actually had azoospermia, nothing. And it wasn't until they collected, and this is in different areas of the country as well.
uh-huh.
Um, and it wasn't until they collected the paperwork or pushed a little bit more themselves that it was established that they actually had no sperm.
Mm,
Um, but unfortunately, it is happening with the clinics as well. Now, I've spoken to quite a prominent GP in the UK,
mm,
and he is advocating for change because he said that they don't get the training on, especially, well, typically fertility, but especially male fertility. They just don't get the input. And they are used to, on a daily basis, dealing with, okay, a stereotype, but this is what he said. So don't come at me. But elderly people with poorly,
mm,
like sicknesses or bad joints or this, that, or the other, your common stuff, which most people
yeah,
do in there, whatever your job is, you have your day to day. But then when someone comes in with a huge curveball, they don't know how to deal with it. They haven't had the training. They do have resources on their kind of intranet, but they obviously are pushed for time. They have 10 minutes per appointment. And
Oh,
unfortunately it's still happening now. And
mm.
like you mentioned at the outset, the tide does need to turn on male fertility across the board, across the world.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So, what was your next step then after that diagnosis? What did you do then?
Very much went into shock, I think.
Hmm.
A perfect example being like when I phoned my wife immediately after to pass the news on to her.
Yeah.
She was like, oh my God, go home. Let's go home. I'll see you at home. She was also at work. And I said, no, it's fine. I'll go back to work and I'll see you at home this evening. And I think that there is shock. I
Shock. Yeah.
literally just had received life-changing news and didn't know how to react to it. I think that is very typical of how many men deal with this. Anyone is like being told
Yes.
that you're infertile. But typically, as a man, I went back into the office and I was just being jovial me, and
Mm.
that was the story for the next year and a half. Whilst that the next test confirmed it as well.
Hmm.
And I say shock, trauma, grief, which I know you said we'll come on to, but all of this because for the next year and a year and a half until I had that varicocele embolization, because I'm sure we'll come to it, but that was one of the things that was uncovered that I had a varicocele. Um, I was just carried to the outside world, to my friends, family, colleagues. I was just me, but my
Mm.
whole inner world was in turmoil. I was
Yes.
just presenting to everyone else.
Mm. Mm.
Sometimes work was a sanctuary away from all of this that was going on.
Mm.
Um, and this at this stage of my life, my wife and I, at this point, when we started trying to conceive, we'd already been married for 4 years, but
Mm.
that kind of era was dictated by a lot of weddings, a lot of so like stag do's, bachelor parties for me. So I was going away on these and being the life and soul of the party, but this was all just covering up what was going on inside. And I didn't know at the time, but sometimes you only realize these things in hindsight and on reflection. But I was being dragged through the grief cycle, and I didn't know this, but what one of the common grief elements being anger. I
Mm.
remember being angry for a long time, but
Mm.
not know it's what's it's not funny, but it's strange to say this now because at the time, and even then, despite all this going on and all of these fertility investigations and trying to fight the system to have like referrals for specialists, this was all dictating my life. But I
Mm.
didn't attribute that anger to that. I thought that it was because I wasn't enjoying my job, or because this was annoying me, or that was annoying me. Not this huge shadow of infertility. And it's crazy now that I
Mm.
did, but I think that's again, it's more complex than I have the skills to or training to identify. But I had just not even considered that. But of course, it's on reflection, it's obvious because I mentioned it being like a shadow. It's no matter what you're doing. Like I mentioned, going away on with my friends for parties or whatever.
Mm.
It's always there. It's
Mm.
just you can't escape it. It just follows you.
Mm.
And I would be angry, waking up angry, going to work angry, and I didn't ever stop to think that it was because of this life changing situation. I just
Mm.
but I think that is the complex nature of it.
Yes, yes. Infertility is really, really very complex, and it can show up in so many different ways, actually, and people wouldn't know necessarily. We have sometimes couples that come and they are in deep grief without knowing that they are actually deeply grieving about it. They just feel so much low energy or angry, as you said, and then, of course, with this other mixture of feeling jealous because all their friends are getting pregnant, showing baby bumps off. Each time you look at social media, you see new baby announcement doesn't really help.
Mm,
So, yeah,
yeah.
very, very complex, very
Oh
complex
yeah.
to navigate.
That, Yeah,
So,
those pregnancy announcements and stuff. It's
so with
really
whom?
hard.
Yeah, it is. With whom did you then discuss your diagnosis in a proper session? With what kind of medical expert who guided you then to the options that you had?
No one. It was um I've described it before, and I think this is the best way to describe it, really. That
Hmm.
initial diagnosis on that day, it was like at that moment I was pushed into a river, and this river was just dragging us along. I say us and me. And there were times where I was being dragged under. I couldn't breathe. There were
Hmm.
times where the river almost slows down and nothing's happening, and you're bobbing there in the doldrums, hoping for progression.
Hmm.
But and then sometimes you have a branch to cling on to for a moment. That maybe those branches are like the appointments,
Hmm.
and often we would just be dictated to. And I fully admit, you know, and this is one thing that I speak to guys about is trying to counteract. I was a passenger in those appointments. I was not being talked to, even though some. I think to provide some clarity, my wife, as I said, we were both referred for tests. My wife had absolutely no issues. Her fertile health was very good. So bearing in mind we were there because of male factor issues, but obviously as a couple, this is a medical problem that you navigate as a couple. Of course,
Hmm.
not counting different situations where, like for example, someone's pursuing parenthood on their own, but typically this is a couple going through this. But they would be talking to my wife. I would be
Hmm.
sat to the side, probably looking with a 1,000 yard stare. And so we'd come out of the appointments often, especially me, with more questions than what we went in with, because we would just be told, oh, this is your options, or this or that. And then we would have to go down Google rabbit holes. And so we never had, and the thing is as well, this was our first real challenge in life. But it taught us a lot of lessons because we put complete faith in these experts that they had our best interest in mind, which I'm not saying they didn't, of course,
Yeah.
but also I think there is a time and for us to question, and
Hmm.
it's not about challenging; it's about questioning, asking
Hmm.
why. Is there another option? Exploring together. It's your treatment, and we learned this through the process. Those early days, we were just taking whatever they said as gospel.
Hmm.
And like I said, these are good people. You know, I've spoken to my two main neurologists a lot since, and I've done things with them. They are remarkable people doing remarkable things.
Hmm.
But I wish that I'd been more present and just questioned a bit because some of the procedures, like I ended up having a second operation, a micro TZ, it has life changing impacts. Like I now have to have testosterone replacement because of the impact that I had on my testicles, having them cut open, and I knew it was a risk, but not how big a risk it was. And so yeah, just that's what I say to guys: to try and be a bit more present, advocate for yourself, ask
Hmm.
questions,
Hmm.
and don't be a passenger because I was. And then, like I said, to carry on with that river analogy, that branch would slip away, and I'll just be dragged along again,
Yeah.
drowning or bobbing for air, and very difficult.
Hmm. So you mentioned now two procedures. One is the varicocele and the other one is the microTZ that you did. I would love to actually have you explain a little bit more in detail what these are and how, like, which one comes first so that those men that are listening to this podcast really understand, like, what are possible options for them.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So
Yeah.
quite early on when I first got in front of like an actual andro-urologist, that's someone who specializes in male fertility, because the initial few people I spoke to were with a urologist, it can specialize in kidney health, for example, but then you can have urologists who specialize in sexual reproduction. And so when I
Mhm.
first got in front of a really lovely urologist, it took her about 2 minutes to identify the fact that I had a varicocele. When she did a physical examination of my testicles.
Mhm.
So a varicocele is a large group of veins above the testicles. And this by this point, was now 2019. So over a year past my diagnosis. It took that long to get in front of a specialist in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
If I rewind a little bit here to 2011, I was in the shower. This is years before. So we didn't start trying until 2017, years before we even were considering trying. But I was checking my testicles as like men should be doing their checks, looking for lumps and stuff like that. And I felt a lump, and I called my wife in. She could feel it. I still remember the look on her face because it was that obvious. So I went to the doctors, got a scan, and they obviously, I was concerned it was a tumor. The sonographer was obviously looking for that as well. And he almost happily dismissed it as, don't worry, it's just a cluster of tubes. So I was delighted because I was worried, that it was a tumor. He felt like he'd done his job. The thing is, this is my testicles, right? They have a couple of functions. One of the primary ones being producing sperm for reproduction.
Exactly.
To have something there and not be signposted for any more checks or questions. And again, and I'm not putting this all on them. This is me as well, right? 2011, I had a smartphone, so I have a world of knowledge at my fingertips. But I was just being like, your health is your own responsibility. But I
Mm-hmm.
was again perhaps putting too much faith and trust in the medical system. He's gone, don't worry, mate. It's just a cluster of tubes. I was like, right, great. Carried on with my life, living for the weekend, beers, football, blah blah blah. Fast forward, a few more years, that urologist says you've got a varicocele being this large cluster of veins, the same lumps that I'd felt
Mm-hmm.
at that point now, 8 years prior. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they have a huge impact on a man's fertility. Huge.
Mm-hmm.
So to put some stats on it, so 12%, around about 12.5% of all men have a varicocele. So they are an enlarged group of veins above the testicles. About 12.5% of all men have one. But in subfertile men, men who struggle with their fertility, 40 to 45% of men
Oh,
have a varicocele. So
oh,
they
wow.
play a huge part in fertility issues for men because they're bigger, more plump, full up veins. What they are doing, sitting above the testicles, what they're doing is overheating the testicles. The
Mm-hmm.
reason the testicles hang below outside of the body is because sperm needs an environment around 2 degrees cooler than body temperature to thrive. Those
Mm-hmm.
veins heat up the testicles and can have a huge impact on sperm health. I mean, I had none, obviously. So, and again, this comes back to me being very much a passenger during my treatment. I didn't research anything. They just said, oh, yeah, have an embolization. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
cool. So in my mind, I was thinking this was the answer to my questions. I would have this very minor operation where in my case, they went in through my neck, put a catheter through my torso, and then put some coils all the way through my body, but then down into the pelvic region above those veins, coil up twist up the coils and then leave them in there. They're still inside me now and will be forever. The idea of that is to restrict and slow the blood flow to those veins to hopefully shrink them.
Mm-hmm.
Very minor operation. I was lucky enough in my life to never have needed any medical treatment before this point. So I thought, medical science is brilliant. This is going to be the answer to my question. Did that, had to wait 3 months for a result because you don't know like the impact that they hope that the sperm production is going to kickstart or whatever. And that was then comes back to that sample that I couldn't do because I'd put so much hope into that operation. But however, now with knowing what I know and doing the work I do and looking back, it's unlikely that a varicocele embolization is going to get you from no sperm to some sperm. So I'm in a fortunate position where I was then able to, because I have a working relationship with that urologist. I said, oh, how come I had that? So what that was all about really, and this probably was explained to me, but again, our old friends, shock, trauma, grief, stress, all circling around.
Mm-hmm.
I probably wasn't listening. What the aim of that was to then I was probably going to always need a micro TZ, which I'll come on to. But the aim of the varicocele embolization was to, for any sperm that might have been being produced that might not necessarily make it out into a sample being produced naturally by myself, but ones that will be recoverable via a surgical procedure, to make them the best uh, quality possible.
Yeah.
So that was the aim of this, as well as overhauling my lifestyle. And again, as I said earlier, I didn't need a massive overhaul. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, I never smoked, but yeah, cutting down on alcohol and other areas, which I'm sure we can probably go into a bit more. But all of this was to give myself the best chance possible that if I was having surgical sperm retrieval, that
Mm-hmm.
anything that would be recovered would be a better quality. Um, but I didn't necessarily take that information on board. And I had just gone, oh, yeah, this is going to be great. It's going to work. And then we're going to have a natural conception, or at least just need, I say inverted commas, almost just need IVF, which is still very invasive, certainly on the female's part. And then but it had no tangible result. My results were still coming up as zero when I did eventually go back into the clinic and give that sample. And so that was personally my most crushing moment after I went back in following that minor operation. When it came back as zero, that was my rock bottom then.
Yes. Yeah. Because then realization really hit. And that's where you realized, even though I have done this procedure, there is still zero sperms.
Yeah,
Mm.
that was
Yeah.
it. Yeah, it was. I think kind
Yeah.
of blissfully, well, not blissfully, no bliss involved, but just
Mm-hmm.
ignorantly going along with appointments and just thinking, oh yeah, okay, well that'll work, and then suddenly rock bottom after that, and knowing that okay, this isn't simple, and this is at this point 2.5 years since we started trying to conceive, but a year and a half since my diagnosis. So it's a long time to be burying my head in the sand and just waiting for a quick fix.
That's such a long time. That's really, really long. Yes. So what happened when you were in rock bottom?
I think I stayed there. I was there for a while, maybe a couple of months really. But I think the key thing about being at rock bottom is there's only one way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, tragically, there's probably another way, but for me, there was only one way, and I was at I was at the bottom, and like kind of looking up was this small glimmer of hope. And at that point, being at rock bottom,
Mm-hmm.
it, at that point, what kicked in was an awareness of just what was happening and how serious this was, and which sounds crazy, a year after getting that diagnosis, but with awareness is what that's really the tool where you can then start to cope with and deal with what. And I realized that, like I mentioned, I was going through grief. I didn't know that I was going through grief, and unconsciously being dragged through the blame part, the anger part, but the last part of grief being acceptance, that is an active element. You cannot get to that unwittingly. You
Mm-hmm.
have to work towards that. And I think that at that point of being at that bottom was when I started working on myself, on the situation, on my relationship, and really started making some forward steps after that.
And can you share that a little bit more? Because it sounds like that you really started to turn around the page here. The shift started to happen.
Yeah.
What were some of the most important things that you feel like really helped you back then to turn around?
So I think what I didn't know that was happening along all that time,
Mm,
my ego and my identity as a man had been
mm,
just been stripped away,
mm,
without me knowing, which is why I was then overcompensating. Uh,
mm,
like I said, when I was with my friends or with my colleagues, being the life and soul and always being the first in the pub and the last out, thinking, well, that makes me a man. The fact that I can last the test of drinking and all this. And I was overcompensating. My ego and identity was shot to pieces as a man. I didn't know who I was. And I was lost at that point after that operation hadn't worked. And I didn't know who I was. But I did something which was a crucial turning point. I asked my wife who I was.
Oh,
And
wow.
I think it's strange to say that I didn't know who I was. But
Mm,
sometimes it's someone from that different perspective who often is the closest person to us
mm,
who knows that answer better than we do. Because I said something along the lines of, I just don't know who I am anymore. And it's kind of like asking a question with an open ended statement. And her answer, everything that she responded, the reasons she married me, the reasons she wanted to start a family with me and stay with me, and that they made me realize that is the foundation of who I was as a person, as a man. And it's things like, she said, your resilience, your humor, your empathy, your compassion, your strength and determination, all of these things. And I realized that at that point, okay, yeah, that is like a foundation of who I am. And then what this then started doing was making me realize, because I was reeling in my lack of ability to procreate, to provide sperm to my wife. And if I can't do that, then who am I as a man? Well,
mm.
actually, we are so much more than our ability to produce a small gamete. It's
Yeah.
what makes us a person is
Hmm.
character traits. And actually, that's the most important thing to be able to pass on, hopefully, as a parent as well. So, what I
Mm.
started being able to do from that is reforming that identity. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. I was at my core at this point. I was vulnerable. I
Mm.
was stripped right back. But then
Mm.
when I was able to realize what that core of me is, who I was,
Mm.
then be able to reapply those layers, new layers, but
Mm.
stronger, like a coat of armor, I was able to reform myself, start looking forward rather than back or in this messy, fuzzy present. I was able
Yeah.
to say, okay, what's next? And started to become more present in appointments, started to become more engaged in my relationship with my wife, and then started to open my eyes to alternate routes to parenthood because I realized at that point, all the results were so poor. And I started to realize, okay, probably that realistically, the chances of me becoming a biological father are slim right now, which
Mm.
again, with hindsight, with a rational state of mind, you think, okay, well, that's obvious, but you don't, I was in denial, again, yeah, we've talked about it many times, grief. I hadn't, or even though all the results were zero, 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 zero again after an operation,
Mm.
I was dismissing that. I was like, no, no, what's the next step to get some sperm from me?
Mm.
And it was then by realizing everything that made me me, that wasn't dependent on me requiring my own sperm to become a father. These were all character traits that I could pass on, regardless of my route to parenthood. So I started not just opening my eyes to our treatment and the ways forward and myself, but also to alternate routes to parenthood as well.
Yes, yes. And it sounds like that was such a moment of power that you had in that conversation with your wife. And this is so, so important to have that because, as you pointed out now a couple of times, couples grieve about so much during this
Yeah.
whole process. And I'm sure if we would ask your wife, she would be able to give us a list of all her grieving moments
Mm.
as well, right? And
Yeah,
then
because
also the
I,
question is like, yeah, sorry.
no, yeah, yeah, you're so right to point that out. And because I was obviously grieving the loss of my
Mm-hmm.
my ability to be a genetic parent. But let's not forget all of those traits that attracted my wife to me.
Mm.
And yeah, of course, like physical traits, that's what gets us through the door. Before you even start dating, where you have to be attracted to someone to settle down with them. So of course she'll be grieving not being able to have my child and see a mini me, because I love her deeply. I wanted to see a mini her. So
Mm,
it goes both ways. And so she has to let go of that as well. And I wasn't present for that for her because I
mm,
was so focused on what I was going through. But of course we were in
mm.
this together. And at that point I just started showing up for her as well.
Yes, yes. And also the grief about like that the initial connection that a couple had once, Often I also when I have a couple sitting in my session and then I have a deep conversation with the husband, they sometimes share actually how they grieve about the loss of their relationships that they once had because they say, everything is about making a baby right now for my
Yeah.
wife. And the woman that is sitting now next to me is not the woman that I married uh,
Yeah.
back then, a couple of years ago. She changed. She changed so much, and everything changed in our relationship now. So also the grief about that relationship that was maybe so light and so full of joy and everything can get really heavy.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good
Yeah.
point. And you know, I speak about this. I speak about it from a different perspective now. But as
Mm,
as parents, I don't think grief is the right word, but I miss
mm,
that early us as well, because we don't have that relationship anymore. It's a different. But I
mm,
also, I say I have the awareness to say, but this is a season in our life. It's one that we obviously deeply wanted, and we will
mm,
get that back. But we'll be a little bit older, and the fun that we have will be different. But
mm,
we're in the trenches right now. But as I said, like, coming back to the morning routines and stuff is it's really hard. But
mm,
we worked for this so hard, so much, that it's finding moments of joy in this, and that knowing that, because we have that solid foundation together, especially then what we built through the pain,
mm,
and who we became on the other side, that will then see us through to the next season,
mm,
whatever that is. But yeah, and the thing is, you talk about that grief is because I think any couples do this when you first get together. You're sussing each other out, aren't you? You're seeing if you're compatible, and you're
mhm,
asking about your future aspirations and dreams. And obviously, one of those early discussions is often about intentions around parenthood, and you align there, so you get to the next step, and then we'll have those dreams of what names have you ever thought about,
mm,
and then for us, we put it on the back burner, because I mentioned we were married for 4 years before we even started trying, and even at that point, before we knew there were going to be any issues, the questions from other people, because we weren't following society's narrative of marriage, house, kids. They were,
mhm.
"Oh, when are you two going to have kids?" That question was annoying us even before we knew we would have an issue, because we were like, we're
Yeah.
just enjoying being a couple. And when we eventually did start trying and realize it was harder and harder, and then you're seeing all of those names getting taken up by other people, which is an
Mm,
additional layer of pain from those pregnancy announcements.
mm,
What you're losing, this grief, is you have nothing to hold on to. It's like it was a dream, and
mm,
like something intangible, and that's popping, and that makes it so much more confusing and so much harder, because you're having to let go of something that you never had, but
yeah.
then you reform this in new ways as you're navigating it. And that for me was then reconsidering my worth as a man, as a hopefully as a father, and a big part of that for me was letting go of that genetic link to a child, and considering
Mhm.
whether I even wanted that operation, the micro teasing, because I was veering towards not having it, because I was becoming certain that I was accepting of an alternate route to parenthood via donor sperm.
Yes, yes. So what actually led you to convince yourself to still go for the micro TC then?
My wife again,
Okay.
she um
Okay.
I was petrified of having my testicles cut open, which I think any men
Mhm.
listening to
I
this
mean,
will
yeah.
completely agree with. Um, and also there's the side effects. So I again, I mentioned I wasn't optimal. I was never like, an athlete or anything. But when I
Mm,
had my initial fertility tests, it was established that my testosterone was on the lower end of normal, which
Okay.
for someone in their early to mid 30s, it should have been way higher, which I think was as a result of my varicocele, potentially of I'd say it was also I had mumps when I was 22. The key part of that being that it was in post puberty. So the damage that did to my testicles, that is actually the component which is largely being attributed to my infertility rather than the varicocele, which is
Okay.
an unfortunate additional factor. Um,
Mm.
so with those two elements, my testosterone was nowhere near what it should have been.
Mm.
So I then started educating myself on testosterone and the fact that perhaps this is why I'd never really felt full of life where I should have been, especially
Mm.
with like a semi good lifestyle. And I was then thinking, well, if my levels are already there, this
Mm.
operation that can have a big risk to testosterone production could mean that I end up on replacement therapy, which I didn't want to do because it's a lifelong commitment.
Mm.
And my wife said, well, what would you regret less? Not having the operation, but then
Mm.
always having the question mark there of whether there was something to be found, or having it but having to live with the side effects. And I was like, wow, okay, let's book it in. I think that's a great point because it was closure. The
Yeah.
results were, and this is the one time where I didn't have to wait around after, because as soon as I came out from the general anesthetic, as soon as I came
Mm.
around from the general anesthetic, the surgeon and the nurse were standing there to say that nothing was found. Now, for me, I'd been wheeled into the theatre, put to sleep, and then that was the next thing I knew. Whereas
Mhm.
my wife, she said with every passing minute, she knew what the result was going to be because, um, so they said, oh, the procedure can take anywhere between half an hour and 2 hours,
Okay.
depending on how much exploration we needed. And unbeknownst to me, it went the full 2 hours. So
Oh.
my wife said she knew once it gone past that kind of hour and a half point, she was pretty certain that it was what the result was going to be.
Mm.
So yeah, I woke up, didn't have to wait around for those answers. And that, do you know, actually, having gone into that convinced that I was ready to proceed with donor sperm, which I think is a conversation which we haven't really even I've kind of glossed over, but because we considered all routes, where like adoption,
Yeah.
etc. But what I really wanted to see was my wife
Mm.
carry a child. I really wanted to experience that. I really
Mm.
wanted her to experience that, and I really wanted to be a part of it. So for us, it was the donor route was uh, the preferred option. But so having gone into the operation convinced that that was what we would do in the result, if it was negative, I actually needed a few more months after that to really come to terms with it because of the finality of it. It was that door was now shut forever. And
Mm.
I think that's probably the right thing to have done. Not probably, it is, because I mentioned acceptance
Mm.
being kind of the final boss of grief.
Mm.
And to even consider bringing a child into the world, I think anyone, even those lucky people who have it easy, they should really be thinking about the long term rather than just like, oh, do we want a child? Yeah, okay. But when you're considering alternate routes to parenthood, which are going to be more complex, i.e., donor conception, you have to do the work because you might make the decision that feels right in the time there.
Mm.
You have to remove yourself and take an objective viewpoint and try and consider how your life will look in 5, 10, 15, 20 and beyond years, and what the opinion of at this point, unconceived child might believe as they grow, and what questions they might ask. You have to have potential answers for those questions.
Yes.
And so I needed to be in that place, and I wasn't. I realized I wasn't. I just had to get over that final hurdle of acceptance. And
Yes.
not to mention the fact that I was in a lot of pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Physically, I talk at this point, but yeah, of course, mentally and emotionally as well.
Yes, absolutely understand. Yeah. I saw a man coming out of of the day surgery clinic, and they were like really, it was not easy for them. It was
Mm.
absolutely not easy for them after a micro-TC. And I think with everything, like what you just said, because the results will be there immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can see how actually just everything just affects them one more time. And you seem to me like, if I picked it up correctly, you said like that you were pretty much already prepared actually before going in, that you knew already what the next plan could be possibly before going into micro-TC. And I think that's a very good approach to do that, because then at least okay, if this doesn't work, we know what the next steps could be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you have to have a you know what your ultimate goal is, right?
Yes.
But having that in mind, but also where are you now? What's the next step
Mhm.
after this? Because if you just focus on that end goal, it can be quite daunting and seem very far away.
Yeah.
So certainly, I think men definitely deal with that better, is kind of focusing on the next step, but also
Yeah.
acknowledging for myself that I knew what that next step was, but I still, even though I thought I was closer to it, I had to just take a moment
Mhm.
and refine myself, recover physically,
Mhm.
and then start to move on mentally as well. But like we had there's some moments in life that I think tell you the answers, and like from the part of the reason why I had realized that I wanted to become for me, I'd let go of the importance of that genetic link before the micro TZ
Mhm.
was I'd looked at my own family situation, and both my parents and my wife's parents were divorced and remarried.
Mhm.
So it was seeing the love that you can have for step parents, um, like brothers and sisters, but also my father's side, my grandfather. It wasn't my uh, paternal genetic grandfather, but he raised my dad and his brothers since they were children, and so he was in my life since the moment I was born, and he
Mhm.
was everything that a grandfather should be.
Mhm.
And then there's the love that I had for my nieces and nephews on my wife's side.
Mhm.
Um, there was no genetic connection there, but particularly with one of my nieces, we've always been very, very close and had a very strong bond. So it's
Mhm.
drawing on my own lived experience to
Mhm.
realize that, hey, there's true love there, like deep connection. And
Mhm.
that's not even having seen my wife carry a child, having been there at the birth, having raised them myself. These are people that are very much
Mhm.
in my close internal family, but it's still that one step removed. I'm not
Mhm.
there in the nitty gritty during the nights and the bottle feeds and changing nappies, and it's still having that connection. That
Mhm.
was an important lesson for me. And then that was before, but then after was then having this moment where I was like, I just needed to recompose myself. And my wife and I we took a break to help kind of just like, get away from everything. We went to the south of France, and I started playing football on the beach with this boy. He must have been about 3 years old, French. He didn't
Mhm.
speak any English. I don't speak any French. And we
Mhm.
just had this moment where just playing football with a tennis ball. And it was like a light bulb moment for me. It's like there is no communication here. Like, but this is a moment and this is what I want. And with this kid, it was the bond of football, of that shared moment. And again, it's that it was many steps removed. I'm never going to see this kid again. I never have, obviously.
Mhm.
But that was a micro moment showing you the beauty of connection can have. And I was like, yeah, I want this. So we came back from that and then started our search for a donor.
Mhm. Mhm. So you mentioned just before that you needed a bit of a break. So I often see um, men actually with such a diagnosis taking anything from 3 months up to 2 years of taking a break after a diagnosis, of then the doctor revealing to them that they really don't have any sperms, even with IVF, micro-TZ, anything involved, they wouldn't have their own biological children. So I've seen male clients between 3 months making a decision then on donor sperms between 3 months and up to 2 years, the longest. What helped you? How long did it take for you, and what helped you? Obviously, this was this this moment that you just shared on the beach, right?
Yeah.
Um, but what is it also in your experience when you talk to your clients that can help them actually to move from realizing what the situation is and then going into that acceptance? What can help them the best?
I think it is. So for me, that was about 4 to 6 weeks, I think, after, and then it wasn't that, like, okay, it was still then that the search for a donor then takes a while, and that's in itself is its own journey of acceptance, of realizing that I cannot recreate myself, and you're never going to do that, no matter how similar the donor is to you. So I didn't, like, after initial days of looking, I didn't try and do that anymore because I realized it was an impossible task. I was never going to be able to recreate myself. So look, we start looking at other options. But I think it is, and I'm pleased to hear, that guys sometimes can take a time after, because that it's important to acknowledge that an alternate route to a parenthood, becoming a parent without using your own genetics,
Mm,
it's not a sticking plaster. It's not gonna. You'll be papering over cracks if you're doing it to try and heal your infertility. It doesn't do that. And if you're not properly healing those wounds, then it will resurface. And like I said, you have to take that zoom out, that objective view of the situation, of your own personal situation, and what it will be down the line, because you live with this forever. And I had I could come on to it in a bit, but a very important lesson in this, about 3 months after our kids were born, which I'll come on to in a minute, without losing where I am. But yeah, it's about taking time. Healing takes time. You can't
mm,
fast track it. But
yeah.
what you can do is listen. And now, thankfully, there are other guys talking about this. There's myself, there's a few others, there's a few good men. And that's the thing, there's a few, but
Mm,
those stories are out there. Is everything that I say now, it's not, I'm not telling people that this is the answer you have to do.
mm,
Certain little bits might resonate here. Someone else might have a slightly different story, or a very different story, and it might be slightly some bits from their story. It's all about taking what's applicable for you in your own life, and it might just be some breadcrumbs that can help navigate your way out of this. Like I say, being in that pit and looking up, thinking, how do I get out of this? Well, some
mm,
things that I say might resonate, and if it can just help. And it's just about, I think, really rediscovering yourself, because you do lose yourself, and what can be really difficult for men is if
mm,
you're really struggling and you think, I need some time. But time is one of the hardest things, because we talked earlier about, females, they have a biological clock that ticks.
yeah.
That can put so much extra pressure on guys, because
Mm,
they're like, you know, especially, like I said, the kind of, especially where I am, the mean age of people trying to conceive is in the 30s.
mm,
That time, it doesn't stop for anyone, and that can bring additional pressures. So if you can, and it all comes down to communication with your partner, just
mm,
say, look, I need a bit of time, and that can't be pushed, because my wife learned quite early on in our journey. She knew some of the answers that, like, if I communicated, not just with her but with others, that was what I needed. But I didn't know that, and if she tried to push that on me, it was pushing
mm,
me further away. So it's
yeah.
acknowledging that, of course, you do want progression, but sometimes pushing can set you back. So
Yes.
just taking the time you need, and just really sitting with it, because yeah,
Mm,
you can't progress forward unless you're dealing with the wounds that you're hearing now. And to come back onto my example, so we talked earlier about the pain of pregnancy announcements from friends. Well,
mm,
during the whole, when we got pregnant, during that whole 9 months, And then for the first 3 months, so literally a whole calendar year, since we got pregnant, we didn't have any pregnancy announcements from friends. And I assumed once we had our kids that I'm done, I'm fixed, I'm healed. We had some friends announce a pregnancy when I was 3 months old, and it took me right back there. All of those feelings, that the weird stir of, yes, of course, some joy and happiness for them, but some
Yeah.
jealousy, some resentment of how easy it was for them, just annoyance at the situation, the unfairness, all of that came stirring back up, and I remember
Mm.
literally, I was talking to myself out loud. I remember saying, "Wow, you're back. What are you doing here?" Like, and
Yeah.
that was a very, very important lesson for me, that this grief, this trauma, this uh, you know, everything about it remains. It
Mm.
it's there. It's part of me, and
Mm.
that's why the healing is so important, because
Mm.
these wounds, they remain a part of me. Every now and again they may flare up.
Mm.
I refer to it as my pilot light. So you have a little
Mm.
light as your gas burn. It's there all the time. Sometimes it
Mm.
flares up, and I just have to learn what it is, figure out what it is that's caused that, and let it take its time to dampen back down to the pilot light, because that it's always there. And that's why, and that kind of reason I use that example there is because that's why you have to take that time. And I'm glad that people are aware of that and are doing it.
Yes. 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 And that is so great that you are actually explaining that on how it works with you, because often people think now that they have made the decision to go with donor gametes, that now everything is resolved. And once they get pregnant, they feel like, okay, now this is done, right? But actually, it's like what you just said, it can actually come back on you again and again, by either our social environment, but also by the way how your relationship is working with the kids. I had one of my clients who came back when their daughter was 3 years old, and there was a little moment where she refused to be hugged by her mom, and she was an egg donor conceived child, and her mom really took it so personally because she felt like she must feel that I'm not her biological mom. That's why she is now actually, rejecting me. And there was this whole thing coming up again for her, and we had to really process that again with the healing and the trauma and everything that was attached to it.
Yeah. It happens,
Yeah.
and you can, and it's really hard. And we have it now, at night time. So I should probably explain, because I've kind of referred to children where we had twins.
Mhm.
So we had a boy and a girl, but yeah, at night time, my daughter isn't interested in me. She only wants mummy, and it's really hard to deal with. And I think, yeah, I personally have never I've never taken it as like a biological thing. It's
Mhm.
just different scenarios in different comforts at different times. And like there was a point, it's not so much like it now, but there was a point maybe 2 years ago. So our twins are now 4.5, or nearer 5 actually. But yeah,
Mhm.
maybe 2 years ago, my son, he was so much a daddy's boy. And like
Mhm.
my wife would be like, "Oh, come on, like, come to me." But she has that biological connection. But so yeah, it's part of parenting is that at times you're the favorite one, at times you're the enemy. And if you aren't perhaps rock solid with your choices and your ability to create alternate bonds and strengthen that connection, it can. And I'm not saying it doesn't, you know, it doesn't always come up as a question, but
Mhm.
you don't allow it to create this big rift. It's just yeah, it's just part of parenting, and which is hard. It's parent. I remember we struggled for so long to get there. I remember like, oh, if we get there or when we get there. I think we used often a bit of neuro linguistic programming, but we'd often say, when, not if, it was when for us. And because I say about hope, that we never let go of that. At
Mm.
times we were, like, say, we're climbing the mountain of hope. At times we were just hanging on by fingers, but
Yeah.
we still had it. But we've said when we get there, we are going to appreciate and be grateful for every moment. Uh, Even if we are exhausted and poorly, we're going to go, oh, it doesn't matter because we wanted this so desperately. Well, that went out the window pretty quickly. it's, it's just, but yeah, I think what it does is it gets us back there very quickly. And I
Yes.
like to think quicker than like people who don't have that, um, haven't had that struggle. I think we do bounce back to that a point of yeah, gratitude and happiness very quickly. But yeah, of course, it's still very, very hard.
Yes, it's reality once again, right? Um, I was just curious if you reflect back, and I'm sure you did already, but if you could share with us from end of 2017, if you reflect on your journey till you got the news about a successful pregnancy, would there be anything that you would have changed if you would have known certain things or had done certain things differently? What would have been those things that you would have loved to have done differently?
Hmm. It's a great question. So the kind of the objective thing about what we went through, the diagnosis,
Hmm.
the failed operations, the failed sample productions from me, the delays, COVID as well. We were
Yeah.
2 days away from our second cycle, and it was just cancelled because of COVID. So we had to navigate that. So we had lots of setbacks. We had other points where we had probably fast forwarded because we were quite pushy in times with the systems, and we took the squeaky wheel approach. They say that the squeaky wheel is the one that gets oiled. So we
Mm.
were constantly. So there were times where we had delays. There were times where we had maybe shortcuts. I
Mm.
wouldn't change any of that because it was leading me to who our children was supposed to be. I always think that if perhaps if I'd said no to the operations, we would have been a few months ahead. But then maybe our donor wasn't available, or
Mhm.
if we had more delays, or the delays we had, I truly believe everything we did was leading us to our children. So
Mhm.
overall, no, I wouldn't change. And I'm talking here about the objective, the bigger, the big things. But I think what I would change maybe is just myself being. It's so hard to say. It's almost an impossible because I think that I was going through a process, and that process has led me to who I am now, which is
Mhm.
like Shaun 2.0, which was a better version of the Shaun that went into this,
Mhm.
which has now made me a better person, a better husband, but crucially a better father than what I probably would have been. Um, so I think it probably all was part of the process. And if I say, oh, I would change maybe being more present in the appointments or more community, I can't even say it, communicative with my wife.
Mhm.
I think I was following the path that I needed to follow at the time in lieu of there not being any other men talking about this.
Mhm.
What I would change, if I could, was insert a different a me in the scenario, because there was a point, I think probably 2 years down the line, where I started looking for other men going through this, and it wasn't there. So I obviously needed it at that time. Uh, I wanted that peer support. I wanted to see
Mhm.
other guys who had been through this, and perhaps that would have sped things up in a different way. Probably more so my healing, emotionally and mentally. Um, but it wasn't there, and
Yeah.
that yeah. So I think that's probably what I would have wished for at the time.
Yes. Yeah. And in your work that you do with your clients, Sean, is it more focused on one-on-ones, or do you actually have a peer support group as well that you support?
Yeah. So I do male fertility coaching as like on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah.
And the Kieran, who I co-founded Nexus Fertility with, he does like the physical side of coaching because he's a personal trainer by trade, and he's now applied that to the fertility side. So he does like that's separate, like kind of one-to-one stuff. But then we, as part of our community, we have our group support groups. So actually, we do one a month, and it's tonight actually.
Oh.
Where it falls, yeah. So but yeah, so that's all. Any notion or
Mm.
anecdote or anything you see where it says that men don't talk, honestly, it's nonsense. It really is. I've seen it now. It's 5 years since I've started sharing my story, and I
Mm.
mean, it just opened floodgates for men to come forward. Well,
Mm.
maybe a wrong. That's probably a wrong word. It wasn't like an outpouring of men going finally, but
Yeah.
what it did was it was more so from the female partners, but then putting the men in contact with me. But now 5 years on, it has shifted. We we do in person meets where we have like 15 guys come and share openly and honestly. We have online meets where again the tiles on the computer are full and men
Mm.
sharing vulnerably and openly. But what you need is that space where they know that everyone is going through it, that everyone gets it. You don't have to explain why you might be feeling in some way, or you,
Mm.
if for example, you just say, "Oh, we had a pregnancy announcement in our friends group this week." Everyone
Mm.
just goes, yeah, that's really tough." You don't have to explain what you're feeling because everyone gets it. Do you know what I mean? Like it's that group
Mm.
facilitation. So, but yeah, with my coaching, yeah, it's one to one. I speak to guy. I'm working with a guy in China, uh,
Mm.
a few Americans and Canadians, and then of course like Brits as well. But it just shows that once you have that facilitation, and people do come to me because they know I've walked that walk, and
Yeah.
I look, walk, and talk, and sound like them, and it's that mutual understanding. And if someone, again, I use the analogy of leaving breadcrumbs. I've navigated it myself. It's never about me dictating what I did. It's their moment, their session, there, and everyone's different, and that's the beauty of life. And that
Yeah.
we all have different ways of navigating stuff, but it's that kind of comfort of knowing that I've tread that path as well.
Yes. Yes. And you're on this mission as well to let all the men out there know that they are not in an isolated space, that they are not alone with their topic, right?
That's the key point. That's
Yeah.
literally it. Is that you're not alone. And yeah, I was so alone when I was going through this, and that's
Yeah.
what I would. Yeah, probably a very long-winded way of answering your last question. What I would change, it would just be that I wasn't alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Well, wow. Thank you so, so much, Shaun, for all the insights that you shared. I think there are so many golden nuggets here for our listeners to take away from today's session. I would love to have you back for another episode, please.
Oh, absolutely.
If I can extend an invite
Yeah.
already. Maybe we are slowly wrapping up, although I could go on and on because it's so inspiring to listen to you. Um, as a wrap-up question, and then I have one more for our listeners actually, but for yourself, if you get, I know that you have younger kids and it may or may not be actually possible for you to get a whole day to yourself, but if you get, what would you do with that day?
Sleep. um, that was yeah. No,
That was
I
very
actually,
honest.
I actually, oh, I wouldn't, and I can actually say this, because I had this recently. I say a whole day. It was like 6 hours whilst they were at school, but
Mhm.
I just slowed down. I went to like a sauna and where it has like a cold dip as well. Just
Yeah.
and then for a long walk along the beach, just a bit of time and presence because yeah, it's life is fast. Life is,
Mhm.
but it's in a beautiful way. But sometimes it's good to slow down and just remember like who I am and have that time to myself as well.
Yes, yes. And I think that's so important, what you just mentioned, to really slow down and become aware of who am I really
Yeah,
every now and then, right? Because it's all so fast-paced, what's around us. Yeah.
yeah.
And if you want to share some words of encouragement for our listeners, it's the new year. Some of them might have had an exhausting 2025 and they just are about to start into 2026. What could be like something that could be like words of encouragement for all the men out there?
I think absolutely that you're not alone. It's important to acknowledge that. You might feel like it, but hopefully this episode finds its way to you, and you just know that there is, even if you don't take any action, know that you're not alone. That's first and foremost. But then know that there are communities out there now. We have a WhatsApp chat group, and there are guys from in there, literally from all over the world. And that is the key as well, is that no matter what you're going through, no matter what your cultural background, your religious background, or anything like that, there are people in there who absolutely understand what you're going through.
Mm.
And that in itself, that community and feeling accepted and not alone is a huge part of healing and moving forward. So I hope that this year that can be something that happens for you, because yeah, that's where the magic is like I said, being like I was myself, being at the bottom of the pit and knowing that there was one way to go, and finding your way, your tools to do that.
Mm, wonderful. That's so inspiring and empowering. And can I just clarify the WhatsApp group that you mentioned? Can anyone join the WhatsApp group? Is that true? Is that
For
correct?
men, just men,
Yeah,
is
for
for,
men.
yeah, safe space just for men. So yeah,
Absolutely.
it's but anyone's welcome, and
Okay.
you can find your way in there from through our website. It's probably the easiest way. Yeah, it's
Yes.
nexusfertility.com, and that's Nexus with a X and Y.
Yes, and we put all the information in the show link of this episode so that people really can find, like men can really find the way to your website as well as to your WhatsApp group.
Yeah, that's the best way. And yeah, we're there waiting for you. So I hope to see you there.
Yes, I hope so too, that many men who have listened today, or maybe some of the listeners can actually forward this episode to their best friends and share it so that they actually can really find you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
thank you. Thank you so much for your time today, Shaun. It was such a pleasure to have you here. Such an incredible, inspiring story that you went through, coming out the other way from rock bottom and coming out in such a strong, empowering, and inspiring way and finding your purpose, really.
thank you for having me, and thank you for your kind words as well.
Thank you. Wow, wasn't that amazing? I loved how Shaun actually explained every step of the process that he and his wife went through, and also the openness and the really honest reflection that he has on his own journey, but also on the social environment where we are, but also the medical. We didn't dive too much into the work that he's doing with the medical experts now, but we shall continue to have this conversation because I feel this is truly an area where we need to talk much more about. And luckily, there are people like Shaun Greenaway out there that are so passionate about this and are opening up and giving an opportunity to all the men out there to join his WhatsApp group and to really exchange that with peers, but also to reach out to Shaun to have a one-on-one. So all the links and all the information about Shaun's work is in the show notes. Please go there. Please take a look at his website as well as on the amazing work that Shaun is doing. I absolutely enjoyed this conversation. And I hope if this episode resonated with you and you feel that there are friends out there that it could be helpful to listen to it as well, or it could be shared to anyone, please do so, please. We are on this mission to let everyone know out there, wherever you sit, that you are not alone. Please join us on this mission to help others so that they don't have to go through what Shaun experienced, but what many others experience in a complete silence. Thank you again for tuning in, for taking your time to be with us here today. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to Shaun today. Thank you, Shaun, again. And to all of you who took the time and tuned in. I can't wait to follow up with many, many more episodes and really bring the inspiration, the wisdom, but also experiences to all of those that need to hear this around the world. Thank you for taking the time again, and we shall see you next week then.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Fertility Counselor podcast. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. If you need support or have any questions, reach out to us via email at inquiries@counselingconnects.com. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Fertility Connects. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to learn more about us and the services we offer, head to www.fertilityconnects.com. And if you're looking for support beyond fertility, visit www.counselingconnects.com. Take care, and we'll see you in the next episode.